Welcome to Bell Brothers Brewing.
Engineers talking about beers.
I'm Curtis.
I'm Cody.
And as you can see, we have the honorary Bell brother, Ethan.
Hey guys, so you've all seen the Bell's brother's wife, Liz, and I'm her brother, and I hang out with these guys all the time, like drinking their beer, and I watch the videos all the time online.
One of our 12 viewers. Reliable.
I actually think we're up to 25 subscribers, so the message is slowly sinking in, right? Of 500 viewers on Facebook, we have 25 on YouTube.
You're getting there. You're getting there.
Progress.
Which brings me to my point. If you like the Bell Brothers content and want to see more, head on over to the YouTube channel and make sure you like and subscribe, because your viewership and your subscription means the world to us.
And if you want to be a part of the Bell Brothers content, let us know. We'll bring you in. It's not that hard to send a Zoom invite. They're free. And we'll bring you in. We'll do stuff. You want to be a part of a recipe, let us know. We'll do recipes with people. We'll do Will It videos if you got ideas. Like if you want something reviewed.
Actually, Bearded and Bored really wants to be a part of our next Will It video. So, Bearded, we hear you. We're coming. As soon as we can figure it out, some sort of logistics, or maybe we'll mail it to you or let you know ahead of time. We'll do some sort of virtual, or if you're close by, we'll do a trip. But Bearded and Bored, we're headed your way. What are we doing today, Cody? What is the B3 brew for November?
The B3 brew for November is going to be a Gingersnap porter.
Gingersnap. Now,
Gingersnap.
where the heck did Gingersnap come from, Cody?
You know where it came from. This is your wife's idea. She brought this up after last New Year's when we made a pre-prohibition porter for a Roaring 20s party, and it had a little bit of molasses in it and had some good molassesy notes, and she was like, you know what? You could make that into a Gingersnap cookie porter. And so here we are, almost a year later, time for the Gingersnap cookie porter.
It has been a year. Wow, such a long time. Though we've also got the theme, right, that you should be watching. The theme for November is spice beer, because I felt that was important for Thanksgiving. Ethan, you want to give us what the overall impression is of the pre-prohibition porter?
So the overall impression of the pre-prohibition porter is it's an American adaptation of an English porter using American ingredients, including adjuncts.
What the hell does that mean, Cody?
So that means that this is a American style, first word and thing, version of a English porter, which is usually a darker, kind of between a stout and a bitter, or not bitter, a stout and a mild. The original name for an English stout is actually a stout porter, because stouts are a stronger, darker porter. When it says including adjuncts, means we're going to be using maybe some corn, some molasses.
So with that, I think it's important to jump down to characteristic ingredients.
That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah.
Characteristic ingredients is where I was going, and I should just stop and go back to that part. So I will read characteristic ingredients. So 2 and 6 row malt, or a combination of both, are used alongside low percentages of dark malts, including black, chocolate, and brown malt. Roasted barley is not typically used. Adjuncts are acceptable, including corn, brewer's licorice, molasses, and porterine. I have no idea what porterine is. Don't ask me.
I was just about to.
More historical versions will have up to 20% adjuncts, lager or ale yeast, and emphasis on historical American bittering hops, cluster, Willamette, and Cascade, though finishing flavor hops may vary.
You know, what was kind of interesting on that, right, is the higher percentage of adjuncts. for the style itself. When we talk about adjuncts, we've talked on this channel before, right? That's your corn, that's that molasses, that's the licorice. It's the extra pieces that you add on that are not that base grain or the base malt that you're utilizing to create the beer. And at 20%, that's a huge portion. I mean, it's 1/5 of the entire recipe that you're really kind of creating out of the traditional, right? The Germans would hate that with their style, right? It's against the rules.
That is not part of the Reinskiboot.
So
you break the Reinskiboot.
if you're not familiar with what Cody's just saying on the terminology there, it is the German term for the recipe of beer. Beer has malts, it has hops, it has water, and it has yeast, and you shall not go outside of that realm. Period. End of story. Like, in order to make beer, you have to stay within that. Now you can screw with those, right? Like, obviously they do like smoked malts, right? And they smoke them and they create like a very interesting beer.
Well, it's by law. Like, the Reinskiboot is not just a tradition; it is a law in Germany. If it is beer, it must adhere to the Reinskiboot. If you put fruit in your beer, it is no longer beer; it's something else. You cannot even sell it. If you said this is beer and it had fruit in it, they'd be like, "No, that is not beer," and you are a false advertiser. You could be sued for that.
So I thought the really interesting piece of the pre-prohibition porter being that we have so much adjunct involved in that. And I think that kind of pushes itself towards the history. Commercially brewed in Philadelphia during the Revolutionary period, the beer gained wide acceptance in a newly formed mid-Atlantic states and was endorsed by President George Washington. Wow, all the way back to the founding father, right? Way back. The idea is that this is a historical beer. We're looking at older style ingredients, older style recipes. We're bringing in what for adjuncts might be actually flavoring, right? Because they didn't have the capabilities and the range of ingredients that we have available to us now.
When you talk about molasses, you're talking about something that, I mean, they were throwing molasses in everything because it was just a leftover from making sugar, and they needed to do something with it. So they're like, put it in beer, maybe that'll make molasses better. So I think we've kind of got this part figured out. Do we want to move on to the spice beer?
Right. Yeah. So with the ginger beer aspect, right, or the Gingersnap porter that we're going to be adding in, that takes us, like we had talked about in the pumpkin beer, where we have our baseline that is a pre-prohibition porter, and we're going to move it to the Gingersnap or the spiced beer category. And which category is that, Cody?
Wham. So it's going to be a winter seasonal. So that's a 30C.
Any questions, comments, concerns there, Ethan?
The main question I have, when it was talking about the adjuncts, it listed the 3 different ones: the corn, the porterine, and then the licorice. Oh, and the 4 molasses. Are you going to add all of those or just the molasses?
So for our recipe, we're just adding the molasses. So when it lists those adjuncts, they're available to you because, like Cody was saying, you had different adjuncts at the time, depending on the location in which you were in the States. Like, your city might have something extra that was around. And so in our case, we wanted to use molasses as that dark, rich, kind of interesting, complex sugar to really bring up that pre-prohibition feel, that taste.
Okay. But to be a pre-prohibition, it doesn't have to have all. It just has to have one. Basically.
It doesn't. I mean, I wouldn't say you don't even really need one, but in order to really, you really should. Yeah, it would be more difficult, I think, to you.
I think it'd be difficult to really make it taste right without adding at least one of them.
Okay.
Otherwise, because especially to have any interesting flavor, because if you read that recipe or that list and what it talks about, you can put in there. You're pretty much looking at base malt, dark malt, done. It doesn't add anything else. There's no amber malts. There's no crystal malt. There's no medium. There is base malt, roasted malt, done with your malts. All right. So let's look at the 30C BJCP guideline here. So winter seasonal beers, just cold weather, Christmas holiday season, may include holiday spices, specialty sugars, and other products that are reminiscent of mulling spices or Christmas holiday desserts. Overall impressions are a stronger, darker, spiced beer that often has a rich body, warming finish, suggesting a good accompaniment for the cold winter season.
The warming finish points towards like a higher alcohol content, or maybe even like a stronger spice, like that rich, thick kind of chest spice.
I had an idea for that because we've got the ginger in there. The ginger usually gives you that warming, kind of hot feel. And so that comes into when we add the ginger. So when we get to that part where we're doing the recipe, I have an idea on how to add the ginger to get both ginger flavor, but also a little bit of that heat, be reminiscent of the warming finish of a high alcohol beer without us having to go high alcohol. I think if we go too high octane, it'll kind of ruin the pre-prohibition porter side of the deal.
I agree. Yeah, we don't want to go too hot. Otherwise, you get fusel alcohols. I think it's going to throw off some of those minute or delicate flavors that we're going to get from the molasses.
Well, also in a pre-prohibition porter, you're looking at a medium-ish body. So I think we've
Interesting.
got what we need from the standards. Are we ready to go to recipe formulation?
Yeah, I think so. Ethan,
I
you got any questions on this? You got a pretty good idea where we're baselining?
Yeah, I think I've got a pretty decent idea. I've been reading through the rest of what Cody's got on the screen there.
And I wish to put a resounding note on this for the video. This is the first time we have shown Beersmith as our tool in the B3 Brew. And that's because Cody actually has Beersmith on his computer now. So with Beersmith, new tool, new customers, let's walk through from the top. What are we looking at here, right? So we've got the name of the recipe itself, followed by the brewers.
We've got our equipment profile. So in here, we've got our actual, there's a tool for putting in your equipment. So we actually put in our equipment that we use to do the brew. And that helps put in your batch size, your brew house efficiency, all of this detail over here. And then you come down here, you got your style guide comparison, which is very handy when you're kind of just making up a recipe on the fly. You have the entire BJCP guidelines worth of beer in here. And you got some wines floating around in there as well. So once you picked one, you have your vital statistics sitting down here, and it tells you this is what you have, and these are the ranges that are acceptable according to the standard. And then down here, you have your profiles for mash, carbonation, and aging. So our mash will be a single infusion medium body with a batch sparge because it doesn't have a continuous sparge option. And the difference between a batch sparge and continuous sparge are pretty minimal.
And we're unique in the sense that we have the capability to do a continuous sparge. Many brewers are not set up to be able to do that.
So back to this stuff, you got your carbonation, so we're going to put it in a keg to carbonate and force carb it. And then fermentation, we're going to do a 2-stage ale fermentation here.
That's to say we're using ale yeast, and we're using 2-stage being a primary and a secondary. Pop up those options real quick, Cody. I want to look at what else we got here. So you've got lagers, kolsches, ciders, meads, and wines, which obviously you've got the different styles, different yeasts that you're going to end up running into. And then most of them are single, double, or triple stages. And really, I think 3-stage is best defined in that lager state, Cody, because really that's where we see more of that. Do you want to go over what like the true 3 stages of the lager are?
So for lager, you have your primary fermentation. Then you have a middle phase where you're bringing the temperature down until you get to about 40 degrees or so. Some people take it even down to like 33 degrees if you have really, really good temperature control. And then you age or lager for anywhere between a few weeks and a few months, depending on your style and what kind of preferences you have. And you hold it there for however long at that low temperature. I usually do 2 weeks for a lager when we're doing them here, but that's for our lighter lagers. We haven't tried a dark lager or a more high alcohol lager, so those may take a little longer to sort of mellow and get the right flavors. So those may actually need, maybe a full month.
That we now have our setup to start seeing whether or not a recipe is even in the ballpark of what we need to be looking at. So let's add malts. So we're looking at next.
Add fermentables. So we're going to go with a 2-row brewer's malt from Bryce, unless anyone has any concerns with that choice.
I think solid 2-row is pretty straightforward. 1, it was listed already in the pre-prohibition style as a grain. And 2, it's got diastatic power, super simple, no real extra flavors. It's a true neutral baseline, something to build on.
I'm going to go 7
7
to start, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we got that. We're going to add a little bit of chocolate malt.
Look at that piss color over here.
yeah. As soon as he clicked that, I saw that pop up.
Chocolate malt from Bryce is where I was thinking. I was going to go with a pound of Bryce chocolate.
Why are you adding the chocolate there, Cody, though? Like you're just throwing it on there. Give me a reason. What do we add in the chocolate for?
So we're adding it for those roasty dark notes that are characteristic of a porter, which is what it brought up. It's even listed in the traditional ingredients was chocolate malt. So I think we're going to get some nice dark chocolate flavors, some of that roast, the dry bitterness to really help give you a clean finish here.
We're also looking to try to stay away from those burned notes because that's the bigger difference between what a porter and a stout is going to be. Where a porter is supposed to be a little smoother, a little more delicate, and more in those chocolate, dark chocolate, bittering flavors that you're going to get out of a chocolate malt.
Well, especially Bryce's chocolate malt. Like I've noticed that their chocolate malt does give a good darker chocolate flavor. If you want a more lighter chocolate flavor, then you go with the crisp pale chocolate. But I think the dark chocolate flavor is better here, and that's why we went with the Bryce one.
We're only talking, 8 pounds worth of malts at this point in time.
Yeah, which allows us to now do the
molasses.
There we
go.
2 pounds.
2 pounds.
Give us our 20%.
And that's real hefty, right? And if you notice, so our ABV went from like the low end of the category to
all
like
the way up.
way up to the other side. Molasses is fantastic for creating those premium sugars. It is still complex because it's burned or cooked sugars, but the amount of simple sugars available, the yeast just love it.
The only thing I'm looking at here is our color is really dark, but I'm not sure that's an issue. I don't know. Are you worried about it being, it's 5 over the top end of the range?
I think we really need a lot of that chocolate malt. From past experience, the chocolate malt needs more than just a pound of it in order to really kind of kick in some of that flavoring to it. Anything less than that, and it starts to get lost in the background.
So I was actually going to ask about the color. So from the BGCP guidelines that you guys keep talking about, if you were going to take this one to like a competition or something, would that be something you would have to pay more attention to as far as the color to make it look like
Yes
the porter,
and no.
or why no?
So if you look at a BJCP grading sheet, color is visual. Visual is 3 points.
Okay.
So that is your clarity, your head, and your color are 3 points total. So if your color
Out
is
of
off,
50.
you lose 1 point out of 50.
Okay.
If your flavor is off, that is 20 points. So it is much better to sacrifice visual to get the flavor and the aroma right, because that is, flavor is 20 points. I think aroma is like 12 points.
Okay.
So 32 points are, you got another 10 points for overall impressions, meaning like your 3 points that you're going to lose if your color isn't right. If they were really being a jerk about it, we're like, oh, this is 5 SRM off, which is really hard to tell, especially once you get above 30. Like, from 25 to 30, it's not a huge noticeable difference. So they would be like, oh, it's 5 SRM off. I'm going to dock them all 3 of their visual points because it's the wrong color. Like, that's not going to happen. You're going to lose 1 point for the color being off. I'd rather have the flavor right for 12 or for 20 points than the color for 1 point.
Fair enough.
The color makes a big difference if like you're doing an American pale lager or like the American lager light lagers. Like if you say this is an American light lager and then it looks like this, you're gonna get dinged something fierce really fast.
You'll get dinged on points, and you will probably, because if you do an American light lager and it's got any amount of brown, they're like, this has to be wrong. You had to have fucked up. This has to be in the wrong category. You're getting a pity score at best because there's no way they're going to let that by. They're like, nope, that was an amber ale, not an American lager. Moving on.
So in this case, if you're looking at the SRM, we're 5 points over the SRM out of the standard capability, and an SRM is a calculation based on the lava bond of the grain and the amount of liquid you're using, and so it's hard to guess. And so the calculation's a little off. So as long as we're within the range, as long as you're not like, you don't say it's like an American IPA and then it looks like this, like then you might be like way off in your left field somewhere.
Okay. Okay.
So this one will be on the darker end, but it should still be porter-ish looking. Like it might be squeaking up on a stout, but like I said, the flavor's more important anyway. I think fermentable wise, we're looking good here. So that means onto the hops.
Yeah, because obviously we got pretty significant ABV and original gravity, so
All
I
right.
think we're okay.
So for hopping, I was just considering a bittering hop. I wasn't thinking we need any flavor or aroma hops because that's where the ginger is going to come in.
Yeah, I could see that. I could certainly understand. Yeah, we just need a simple bittering to counterbalance what's going on. You don't want to taste a hop. I think it would be really weird is if you tasted a hop or smelled hop, right? Like when you're thinking Gingersnap porter, like the last thing I want to do is like, that smells like citrus or pine or resin. Like resin might, like you could almost squeak a resin into it appropriately.
Resin or spicy kind of sneaking in there and working out, but I think it's better off to just kind of let the molasses and the ginger sort of carry the flavors here. So I'm going to make a guess here at a 1/4 ounce of Citra.
See where that
Oh,
lands
I was
us.
wrong. Apparently
Yes,
1/4 ounce of Citra
significantly.
was 8.
Well, and so yeah, we're using Citra because we have a supply of it. And when you're using a bittering hop, you're not applying any flavors or aromas. The bittering hop at 60 minutes is truly just a bitterness. It's a counterbalance to the sweets and the other flavors that you're getting to make sure that the beer is drinkable. Otherwise, it tastes like sugar, basically, like sugar water.
Sugar
It doesn't-
water,
it's
yeah.
not- hey, do I do that? So you add enough bitterness hops in there to help balance out the two, so it's a drinkable liquid. If we do something at 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or a whirl, then you're starting to get flavors and aromas and oils. We're extracting those oils. At 60 minutes, we isomerize all of the acids, all the oils, and we turn them into bittering agents that then you just taste as a bittering aspect on your palate.
So I think that takes care of hops.
I think it needs to be a little more bitter. Now, I say that only because the molasses, when you're talking molasses, is going to be a perceived sweetness, right? The way we're adding to it.
True, but we're
I'm not-
also going to catch some bitterness from the chocolate malt.
And
little
from
bit.
and the ginger potentially.
And the ginger might add a little. I think. So let's go back to the other thing we need off of the internet, which is going to be the Gingersnap cookie recipe. So if you're looking at this in terms of how we're going to add spices, you got your ground ginger, some cinnamon, and molasses and cinnamon sugar. So I think we need to add a little cinnamon in and the ginger to really get the right flavor. Maybe even clove. It doesn't call for clove, but for some reason I was just thinking clove. But we can maybe skip that to not muddy the flavor up too much.
It might get a little dominating.
Yeah, well, dominating on the ginger is going to be a little more difficult.
Yeah, so maybe just a little bit of cinnamon and then the ginger as well.
I agree.
But I think we'll get some bitterness, a feeling of bitterness from the spices. So we may not need to add too much in the way of hops to really get that balance. I think definitely coming off as perceived sweet really enforces that Gingersnap cookie feel that we're looking for.
And what about your other one? You said you had a Brewers Union discussion forum.
We've got a home brewing blog here that just sort of reinforced what I was already thinking about doing, which is it says when to use ginger, and I'm going to give you the too long didn't read. If you boil it, you get more of the delicate ginger flavors, more of that cooked, refined ginger. And then if you use it in secondary or primary, you get more of the heat and the spicy part of the ginger. I was planning to use both. So I want to boil some of the ginger, maybe an ounce or 2 ounces of ginger to really give it, and that also talks about how much to use. And it says 2 to 4 is the common ground on significant flavor that allows everything else to kind of come through. So I want to go on the low end of that since I'm going to use it twice.
Right.
I'm just going to go on the low end of about 2 ounces of ginger in the boil to really cook that. And this is fresh ginger root, not ginger powder. We used powdered ginger. I would probably cut that in half, maybe even more, because you got so much surface area going on. But in terms of fresh ginger root, so 2 ounces in the boil at about 10 minutes, kind of just like a hop to really give us that ginger flavor, a little more of that cooked ginger feel. And then maybe half an ounce in the secondary with just a little bit of grated ginger in the secondary to kind of give it secondary or primary. I think maybe primary because I haven't seen much of a difference in doing primary or secondary for spicing. So I'm thinking a half ounce in primary and let that sort of soak in to give it some of the heat of the ginger, and that'll help replicate that high alcohol warming sensation. And I think that's important for really replicating a Gingersnap cookie properly, that you have some of that spicier ginger note.
The how much was a question I was actually going to ask, because I know from my own cooking and everything that I do, ginger can be really, really potent and powerful, especially if you let it sit for a little bit. When you're talking 2 ounces in your, 5 gallon, 10 gallon batch, that sounds just about right to me, at least.
Yeah, spices can be problematic in beer. We've discovered this before.
Yeah, some mulled spice cider has been a previous experiment, huh, Cody?
Well, that and the chai spice stout that was undrinkable for like a whole year till we had to wait. A full year for the spice flavor to drop off enough that you could drink it.
Yeah, we aged the spice out of it. Now, once it aged for a year, super drinkable. It was delicious, but you had to age that sucker out something fierce.
It was undrinkable. It was just like, you take a sip, right?
So if we're going to boil ginger, right, and it's what it's talking about on that, do you want to use like a tablespoon or how much, like another ounce or half an ounce of cinnamon at that point?
Maybe. I think we should be light with the cinnamon as well.
Right, but I'm
I have
thinking
some
like in
cinnamon
the
chips
boil
at home.
as well.
So maybe do a tablespoon of cinnamon chips and toss them in there and let them boil as well. That might work.
Cinnamon chip, like actual bark of cinnamon at that point?
Yeah, the actual cinnamon bark.
Yeah.
Kara uses it to make like that apple cider drink.
Okay.
And it molds it. It releases really good flavor when you boil it for just a little while. It gives it that mellow, warm cinnamon, not the like fireball hot cinnamon.
So are you going to also add that in when you put it into the primary?
No, I think I would just use it in the secondary or just in the boil. I want to keep the focus on the ginger. The ginger and the molasses are the two flavors that really are the core of a ginger snap cookie. And so we want to really make those flavors the core of this recipe. If we muddy it up too much and add in too many other things going on, we'll sort of lose what's going to make it pop.
Distract. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and pop back over to Beersmith, and we're going to add miscellaneous. Let's see if it's in ginger root.
Hey.
There we go. We are going to do 2 ounces in the boil with 12 minutes. 12 minutes, whatever you say. Beersmith. Got to remember to use that add without closing button. Cinnamon stick, half an ounce, and then we're going to go back to the ginger root, half an ounce. Unless you have a disagreement there.
No, I think half an ounce. Like when you were saying, between 2 and 4 ounces are acceptable to a beer, and it was talking about like 10 ounces for like a lot of ginger flavor. I really don't want it to be a lot of ginger flavor, and so I think 2.5 is a good balance. Where you're talking about boiling it really quickly to get the oils, and then being able to let it seep in the primary. I think it's a good balance. I think 2.5 is pretty good. If it's too strong, it's too strong, right? That's why we do the B3 brews. They're experimental. That's the whole point, is that they're supposed to be wild and crazy. And we're pushing those limits.
And a year later, when we do it in November again, we can fix it next time.
Hopefully by then we're doing it on the much bigger batch.
So next important category is yeast.
But the style guideline for pre-prohibition was English style porter with American ingredients. And so I think this is our opportunity to sing in some of those English styles to it.
That one?
I think that seems an appropriate one. Or their English stout. Wasn't there an
Dry
English?
Irish.
The dry, is there a dry?
There's Irish ale. I think it's the British ale. English ale. So that dropped our ABV by 0.3%. So we're still strong, but not super strong. So add a little extra sugar back in. All right, so we've got all of our baseline stuff. Now we go water, my house water, 8.78 gallons of water.
And we did that by going online and doing a buttload of research and finding your water report for your area and your water supply, and then adding that to Beersmith as here are what are the bicarbonates and the sulfates and all of the different minerals that are reported inside your water. So when you do that, we'll see later on, it'll actually help fill out what we have as a baseline in the water that we're using, and then we can add the water chemistry necessary to bring it into the right style that we want.
Water chemistry was going to be a question I was going to ask about, so I'm glad you brought that up.
We'll hit that in a moment.
There's these cool tabs at the top. So now we're going to go to starter.
Oh, starter. So this says that we're going to need 198 billion yeast cells. So if we want to use no starter, we need 3 packets of yeast cells. We're not going to do that. We're going to go 1 liter starter. Yeah, that'll do it.
For the stir plate? Yeah. Well, so next to your 1 liter there, it says recommended size is 0.79 or 0.8 liters of starter using a starter or a stir plate. So once Cody puts in his 1, it shows that we're actually going to start with 237 billion cells, which is perfect. All right, that means we're
only
nice and
overshooting
strong
by
40 billion.
It sounds like a lot, but it's not.
Yeah, 20, 30 billion, that's no thing. And what's cool is if we took out the stir plate, we need to almost double our starter size to make it.
Yeah.
So stir plate, real handy for making starters.
Best $40 you could invest in if you're going to do it.
All right, so starter is taken care of. We know we need to do a 1 liter with 3.38 ounces of dry malt extract. It's a very handy tool in here if you end up needing it.
Big time.
So now we go on to water chemistry. So this, as we said, has my house water statistics put in it. We're going to want to go ahead and go for a malt forward, you think, or do you want to go
I would say slightly sweet, so slightly malty. Like we don't want to go
Slightly
crazy.
malty.
Like I wouldn't say
2 to
2
1.
times. Yeah, not 2 to 1. Probably something either 1 to 1 or like 1.25. Probably
Okay.
1.25 to 1.
1 1/4. Let's go calcium chloride, 3 grams. Epsom salt.
You didn't add.
Did I miss it?
Yep.
3 grams. And without closing.
There you go.
Epsom salt, probably
1.
I think 2 grams is still going to be
2.
necessary to get enough magnesium.
And I think salt is going to be really important.
I was
going
going
to
to do
across the board.
single gram of salt here to get
Yeah.
that clean malt flavor. It did add, it just didn't show it. Okay, so you're at double the chloride. Oh, because of the salt.
True.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I can back off our calcium. I can back off the calcium chloride a little bit here. But as you see, double the bottom line, but I'd still prefer to be higher on the magnesium.
We're right
So I
smack
think
in the
I'm gonna
middle,
go with
right? Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
a good
right in the
point,
middle
right? We need between 10 and 40 parts per million of magnesium, and we're 20. Smack in the
that.
middle.
So let's adjust this calcium chloride to
2.
2 grams.
See where 2 lands us?
Still 1.5 times there to back that off to 1.5. I think we're at the bottom on calcium. So we'll leave that at 2 grams. But we'll take the salt down to 0.5 gram.
Yeah, it sounds right.
There we go. So that's right at about 1 1/4 if you estimate sulfate at about 100.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at 126 over here. I think that puts us in a good place.
And
Our
so-
calcium is good, magnesium is good, sulfate good, sodium good, chloride good, and bicarb good. So every number is within categories, and our chloride to sulfate ratio is about where we want it.
And what you really want to look at is a baseline kind of understanding. Is the bottom right, very bottom right icon there where it says what's the balance, right? Now, if you looked at it when we first started, it said very bitter, I think it was, or like strongly bitter. And then
Yes.
as we added, it started moving it in the opposite direction. And when Cody was talking about doing too much fluoride, it said very malty, right? So we were
Yeah.
in the super sweet range versus the super bitter range.
Well, so part of why it comes up as very bitter right when we start is my chloride at home is under 2 parts per million, and the sulfate is at 17, and it uses a ratio. Sulfate to chloride ratio is what's the actual math behind whether it's malty or bitter. So you're talking it's just over 8 times more sulfate than chloride in my groundwater.
Which is why it pays to do your water chemistry, because otherwise any multi beer we created out of your house would not work.
Yeah, if we did not do water chem, it would be some really, really bad beer. Just be really flat malty beer.
Your water
That'd be
has
nice.
like twice the amount of sulfate as I am legally allowed to discharge from my treatment facility. That is pretty crazy.
That's coming from Colorado Springs Utilities there. So
Yeah,
The thing is, they don't want to have to. They don't want to have to process it themselves, so they make you do it.
right.
Basically, yes.
So now we're going to do our last step here, which is the mash. And so this is where that mash, the single infusion medium body comes in. So our first and only step is to mash in with 10.8 quarts of water at 162 degrees so that it drops to 152 degrees, which we know is not quite right. It actually needs to be 172 degrees to work with our system.
So check the box that is the adjust temps for equipment. I want to see how much of adjustment it does. So it did bring it up.
2
There you
degrees.
go. Not quite
Still
as
not quite
much,
right,
but
though.
it's closer.
Yeah, it's closer. And then we got our sparge. But the real thing that we need to do on this page is look at down here, our mash pH adjustments. So right now it says our measured mash pH.
No,
sorry, not
adjusted.
That. The unadjusted mash pH is 5.48, and our target is 5. So I'm going to put in 5.48 right here. I'm going to ask it to tell me if I was using lactic at 88% concentration. It says I need 3.2 milliliters. I need 3.2 milliliters of acid to add in here. Lactic grams. There you go, 2.1.
There you go. That's close enough.
Nice.
You want anywhere between like 2 or 5.1 to like 5.3 is an okay range. Like if you fall within that acid, that pH, you're reasonable. 5.2 is about right for where you want, and that is the efficiencies in which the alpha and beta amylase enzymes are operating, right? If your pH is outside of that range, then they start to not be quite so happy. And if you get too far outside of those ranges, it'll denature them completely and you're wasting your time. All right, so with that, we can go back to the design and it adds all the pieces that we just added. See all that?
Yep.
Cool. So it adds the
Nice.
salts, the calcium
Your
chlorides, and
salt
epsoms and lactates. So all of that is complete. And we know all of our calculations are good. So the step-by-step process which we do to a brew is solid. Save.
All right, so now we can do one last check through our vital statistics here, and everything still looks good. We're green, IBUs are on the mid to low side. Our color is a little high, but who cares? And our ABV is a little high, and that's good.
I think that's going to help the warming, and we're looking for that ginger kind of push, so it might help.
And that's relying on probably a little bit of a high efficiency fermentation to say that it's going to be at 6.2. I think we'll probably come in a little lower than that.
I think it's a solid recipe. I think it has potential for where we're going. Obviously, we're going to have to find out, right? So we're going to brew that on Sunday, and we'll move on to the next one. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this, Cody?
Nope. I think we got it just right. It's all kind of narrowed in, and I'm excited to see how it tastes. Gingersnap cookie beer sounds good to me.
Right? Yeah, I'm looking forward to November. Ethan, any parting words?
No, I'm really just excited to, like Cody said, I'm just excited to try it, see how it tastes.
We're going to move on to the tasting. Thanks for joining us here. It's going to be like a month before this comes out anywhere, and probably 3 weeks before we even taste it. But for you guys, it's going to be a snap of the fingers, a rotation of the screen.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Tasting time.
Before I forget, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit that bell. Ring that bell. Hit the subscribe button. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you keep an eye out for any new videos.
All right, so it's time for the tasting.
For you, it's been, nothing. For us, it's been a month. I want to remind the viewer that we don't go back and review what you just watched prior to our beer tasting. And that's to make sure that we get like a good, clean kind of look at the beer.
We're tasting without any preconceptions of what it's going to taste like based off the recipe or anything like that. We're trying to come at it as someone who didn't brew the beer tasting the beer.
Exactly.
As much as possible.
So we're trying to get like that fair, impartial judging aspect of it. And honestly, I think we judge our beers probably more harsh than anybody else.
Usually I'm like, this is absolute crap. And someone's like, that's a pretty decent beer. And I'm like, no, it's fine.
So with that, let's get into it. Aromatics, what are we picking up?
Nice. You get some good molasses.
Kind of a spicy note to it. The ginger, I'm kind of
Hint
picking
of
up a
spice.
little
I'd like to smell a little more ginger.
Yeah,
it's a little strong in the molasses and light in the ginger.
It might be that, again, CO2, it's because we wait so long to get to these, there's not very highly carbonated yet. They're still working on that carbonation timeline. It's nice and chilled, so no problems there.
Yeah.
But we might not be getting quite all of the aromatics because it's not frothy and foamy like it would normally be.
The visual's not bad. I mean, it's a dark beer, so you can't see through it in the slightest, but I'm not seeing particulates. It's got that nice true dark that you get from having a clear beer that's dark, whereas you'll get more of a milky brown.
Right.
If you've got a lot of floaters
You
in
can
there.
kind of see it like an angle. If you look at the bottom of the glass, you can see this kind of caramel, kind of nice bright brown, and this clear. You don't see floaters cruising around in there, which is what you're worried about. How's it taste?
Pretty good. It does not quite deliver on the molasses as much as the aroma does.
Woo! That has got ginger kicked to the fucking face. Holy moly. Yeah.
Maybe I'm resistant to ginger flavor?
Not a lot of molasses is the right term on that one. It does have, however, like a candied ginger kick to the face. Holy crap. That's exactly what I was more worried about out of the ginger snap on this one. Or less.
I'm not tasting a really strong ginger kick. I think it could use more ginger in my opinion. Definitely more cinnamon. I'm not really tasting either of the spices well that we added in here. I'm not tasting cinnamoniness. I'm not tasting gingeriness.
It's like the ginger flakes that you get for sushi. You got the little overlaps, the little pile over there.
Little pickled gingers.
Yeah, it's like sucking on that guy.
I'm not getting that at all.
Yeah, I'm getting strong ginger. I think we lost a lot of the really cool complex molasses flavors that we were looking for.
Yeah, you can still sort of get a sweetness near the end of it.
I agree though, cinnamon.
The cinnamon's just not really coming through. So we need a little more cinnamon in the boil.
Yeah.
Let's go to the beer. What do you got?
Based on this one, like the pity score of 3.
Really? Like, I don't find it particularly bad. It's nothing special. I would say it's nowhere near the level that I wanted it to be, but I don't mind it, so I'd call it a 5. Like, it doesn't make me mad, but it's nowhere near what I had in mind.
Oh yeah, no. If I ordered this in a brewery, I would return the taster and not get a pint.
Well, I guess I'd be upset if this was like a Gingersnap, but just as a plain porter, it's an okay porter.
As a plain porter, maybe a little bit, but the ginger still kind of kicks in a little stronger than I like across that. It's a really strange spice flavor to mix into that earthiness, I think, of where the beer is sitting. So you get some dryness from the yeast there, the high efficiency of the fermentation, which means it's high alcohol, or at least higher alcohol, right? It's a little stronger. And I don't pick up any of those alcoholic or the phenols. Sorry, not phenols. Pick up any of those fusel alcohols. So I don't think it's that strong. I just wish that it provided a little bit more
Residual sweet.
Yeah, the
a
residual
little
sweet,
leftover sweet would
a little
really
more
help
cinnamon
balance it.
to help balance that. The ginger is just really the overpowering and the dominating flavor to me across the board.
Yeah, I mean the molasses aroma is great. That's the one thing. Like on that last sip, I could still smell like nice and molassy, and then you taste it. Like, where to go?
Right?
The aroma lies to you.
Yeah, the aroma lies hard. You can smell the molasses in it, and it's like, man, that smells nice. And the molasses just as soon as you get into drinking it.
Does not do well. Maybe it'll age into it. We'll go back and try it in another week or two, and maybe by Thanksgiving it has some sort of decent age to it. But I think that's all we got.
Yep, I think that's it.
Thank you for visiting us here at Bell Brothers Brewing.
Engineers talking about beers.
Cheers. The Bell Brothers, the B3PP. Is that what we got?
Bell Brothers pre-prohibition porter.
The GP.